Welcome back to Epic Movie Home. Today I'll be reviewing a comedy drama movie titled Holes. At the heart of a desert, a group of boys are digging holes in the ground under the blazing sun. Suddenly a rattlesnake shows up nearby, and a boy who has been working tirelessly decides to take off his shoes and touch the snake, which marks his ends. At the same time in the city, Stanley Yelnats IV is walking down the streets, when suddenly a pair of shoes falls on his head, knocking him to the ground. Knowing his dad is working on a cure of stinky feet, Stanley decides to take the shoes home. But at that moment the police surrounds him. Those shoes belongs to a famous baseball player, and were stolen from a charity event, so now Stanley becomes the suspect. The police led him to his parents and immediately notice some questionable things. His dad Stanley III has a basement filled with dozens of shoes, and Stanley IV has the posters of the baseball star all over walls. Considering this evidences, Stanley was brought before a judge, where he's offered two options: jail or spending 18 months in Camp Green Lake. Stanley apparently chooses the camp, and during his trip, he kept on pondering if this incident is as a result of his family course. The bus passes a vast desert filled with holes, and for a second Stanley thinks he can see a merchant and his mule. But it turned out it's just his imagination. Soon he arrives at a small shanty town, which is filled with boys wearing prison uniforms. Stanley meets the warden handyman, named Mr. Sir, who finds Stanley's name amusing. The boy explains the family surname Yelnats is Stanley backwards, and naming the sons Stanley became a tradition to keep the pun, but Mr. seems less concerned, and proceeds to show how things work here. The camp doesn't have watchtowers or fences because they're nothing but desert, for several miles without a single source of water, so nobody dares to escape. Stanley is offered only 2 clothes and a shovel, which will be used to dig holes. Every day, Stanley must dig one hole 5 feet deep, and measure it with the shovel. The longer it takes him to make, the longer he will stay out in the hot sun. He also has to be watchful of the poisonous lizards, and avoid the rattlesnakes, because they can end him. Next, Stanley meets the camp's counselor, Dr. Pendansky, who took him around, and tells him the #1 rule in the camp is not to bother the warden. Pendansky led the other boys to take Stanley to the place where he'll sleep, which has stains from the dead child. The doctor calls the guys by their real names, but they refer to one another using the various nicknames they've acquired here. The youngest boy is called Zero, who gets that name because he talks less. Afterwards, Stanley asked where he can fill his bottle, but he uses the boy's real name, which makes the guy to push him to the ground, and reminds him to use their nicknames. Then Stanley takes dinner, which is a well-mixed bean soup. X-Ray grabs some of his food, claiming he deserves it more because Stanley hasn't dug today. The boy asks Stanley why he's brought here, and when he answers he stole famous shoes. Zero stunned everyone by asking him if the shoes has stars in them. As Stanley affirms it, Zero remembers part of the trial during which the baseball player explained he grew up in an orphanage, and that's why he donated it to charity, calling Stanley a fake fan. Late in the night Stanley can't sleep and remembers that his grandfather claims the family is under a curse. That's why Stanley III is never successful with his inventions. Even Stanley I was unfortunate. He made a fortune in the stock market, but was killed by an infamous criminal known as Kissing Kate. She got that nickname because she would kiss her victims after killing them, leaving glazing lipstick on their faces. However, she didn't kiss Stanley, she just took his treasure chest and left him stranded in the desert. The next morning the boys are woken up when the sun is yet out to start working. Each one of them gets a batter cake for breakfast and a shovel, but when Stanley grabs one, X-Ray pushes him and snatched it from him. It appears X-Ray's shovel is shorter and doesn't let anyone else uses it. When they finally arrives at the digging spot, Mr. Sir clears Stanley that if he finds something intermixed while digging, then he must report it, and should the warden likes it, he would get a day off. However, Mr. Sir never claim what they're digging for in particular. He says it's only to build character. All the boys gets to work, and when they play with the dirt sometimes it falls into another hole. Stanley tries to ask them to be watchful, but the boys only laugh at. Stanley pauses and thinks about the curse again. His ancestor Elia worked in a pig farm and fell in love with his boss's daughter Myra. He visited the native fortune teller, Madame Zeroni, to learn how to win the girl's heart, but Zeroni clears him to put the girl off mind and travel to America to meet his fate. Elia didn't give up easily and asked his boss for Myra's hand. However, there's another suitor who's offering a huge pig as dowry, and Elia was turned down. He returned to Madame Zeroni, who later took pity on him and taught him a trick. Elia have to take a small piglet up the hills every day to drink from a stream while Elia sings a music to it. Elia grew stronger, and the pig would grow larger until it could be used as the best dowry. After handing the pig, he had to come back and carry Zeroni up the hills so she could drink too. If he fails to do that, a curse would be placed on him and his descendants. Stanley follows all due steps for several days until the pig was enormous, so he took it to his boss. However, the pigs turn out to be of same size, and his boss let Myra choose who to marry. Myra couldn't make up her mind, and offered a puzzle game to decide, But Elio was so annoyed by her fickle attitude that he decided to go to America like Zeroni first told him. Unfortunately, he forgot to take Zeroni up the hills before leaving, so she cursed the family as warned. Back to present day, Mr. Sir stops by the boys to fill their bottles with water, and teases Stanley for peeling his hands. The first to finish working is Zero, who's a very fast digger and other boys thinks he eats the sand. When Stanley finally dug his hole, no one was there to help him, so he has to learn how to come out alone. When he's back in town he sees Mr. Sir pointing a gun at him, but apparently he's shooting a yellow-spotted lizard. Mr. Sir misses the shot and the lizard jumps to attack Stanley, but Mr. Sir shoots again and the lizard drops dead. Days starts to pass, and Stanley starts getting used to the camp routine. He wakes up early in the morning, eat overcooked beans, then spends the whole day digging, which causes more blister on his hands. There are also dangerous insects roaming around, and sometimes the shower doesn't even run. The other boys are also always on his neck, making fun of him for being a soft boy. Stanley stays low to avoid trouble, and when he writes to his parents, he lies and says he's having a great time in a normal summer camp. One hot afternoon, Stanley discovers a fossil and brings it to Dr. Pendeski. However, Pendeski informs him the warden care less about fossils. He also reveals that there used to be a lake in the area, and that the land belongs to the warden's grandfather. This activates a flashback showing how the town used to be dynamic and thriving. A merchant named Sam often come here with his cart pulled by his mule to sell wonder onions, which he claimed could cure any illness and keep poisonous lizards away. Sam had a crush on the native teacher Kathryn, and always brought a bag of onions, just for her, so she would give a jar of peaches she gathered in exchange. All the men in the town crushes on Kathryn too and frown at the attention Sam is getting from her. One raining day, Kathryn had to send the kids back home because of the leaks in the class roofs, so Sam volunteered to fix them. This enables him to spend more time and bond with her, so he begins to fix other part of the school too. However, he also has to witness how the adults' evening class kept throwing inappropriate words at her. The warden's grandfather Walker actually asked her out, but she turned him down, leaving him agitated. Soon the school became the center of attraction in the town, but Sam lost his mule, so he got a boat instead. One rainy morning, Sam and Kathryn finally summoned enough courage to kiss, unaware. They were seen by Walker, who immediately spread the news across the town. In just a few hours, all the village men came together and set the school on fire as punishment. Kathryn rushed to ask the sheriff for help. He was dead drunk and asked for a kiss. As Kathryn pushes him away, the sheriff mocked her and called Sam by slurs, reminding that interracial relationships are illegal and Sam would be executed. Terrified, Kathryn ran to warn Sam, but it was too late. The village men shot him while he was on his boat. Shortly after, Kathryn came back and shot the sheriff, then gave him the kiss he wanted so bad. Then she left town and became the fugitive known as Kissing Kate. Back to the present, X-Ray approaches Stanley and tells him that when next he finds anything, he should bring it to him. Later in town, Stanley mistakenly falls on one of his bullies and almost gets into a fight. The boys immediately calm them down, but now Stanley has earned their respect. He got the nickname Caveman, and even gets a better spot in the waterline. Sometime later, Stanley receives a call from his mother, informing him his father's experiments keeps failing, and the landlord might give them quick notice soon. Zero notices Stanley is ready and admits he never learned, so he asks Stanley to teach him. However, Stanley refuses, saying he isn't a good teacher and he's too exhausted for the day, so he needs some rest. One day while digging, Stanley is stunned by discovering a little object with the tag KB. The boys ponders if it's a shotgun shell, but it appears too thin. X-Ray takes the object, disregarding Stanley trying to stand up for himself. As soon as it got to Pendansky, he phones the boss, who immediately comes over, and the boys are stunned to see the warden is a beautiful woman. She's very pleased with the discovery, so she tells X-Ray to take a day off, and instructs the others to finish excavating the area around X-Ray's hole. That afternoon the boys work much longer than usual, but they find nothing because it's the wrong spot. For next few days, the boys have to keep on digging in the same tunnel they've created, yet the only thing they find is a small knob. Soon the warden gives up and instructs the boys back to digging individual holes. The next day, while Mr. Sir is filling their bottles, one of the boys steals a sack of sunflower seeds from the truck. After Mr. Sir leaves, the boys begins throwing them, but unfortunately, Mr. immediately notices the bag is missing and turns the truck around. The boys hurries to hide the seeds and they mistakenly spills it at Stanley's feet, so he tries to cover the rest of them with sand. When Mr. Sir returns, he still spots the seeds, so Stanley covers for the others and says he did it, shocking everyone. Then Mr. Sir takes Stanley to see the warden for punishment. Inside her office, there are a lot of posters about the Kissing Kate, and the warden proceeds to show her special nail polish that she makes with rattlesnake venom. After quickly painting her nails, the warden hits Mr. Sir for stopping Stanley digging over something as stupid as seeds. Then she sent Stanley back to the digging site. When he gets back to the digging area, the boys sees him as an hero, and Zero is done with his hole. Finally, Stanley agrees to teach Zero how to read. The next time they see Mr. Sir, the nails left him 2 horrible scars on the cheeks, and he's so angry with Stanley that he doesn't fill his bottle. As Stanley recalls what he saw in the office, he thinks that the little tube he found was Kissing Kate lipstick. Another flashback shows that Kissing Kate only killed people who were involved in Sam's death and the burning of the school. However, she did a lot of looting, and after taking a treasure chest from Stanley I, she buried it where the lake used to be. While she was resting, she was found by Walker and his wife, who were craving for money after the town went to ruins after the lake dried on the day of Sam's death. Instead of fighting them, Kate plans an interesting revenge. She makes a lizard to bite her and took the location of the chest to her grave. That way William and all his descendants like the warden would digging forever in such vast desert. Back to the present, Stanley begins teaching Zero how to read and write. Zero then reveals his real name is Hector Zeroni, meaning he's a descendant of Madame Zeroni. Since Zero is a very fast digger, he starts helping Stanley with his holes, which makes the other boys envious. One day, Zero shares the story of his mother, who worked so hard to provide for him, but one day she disappeared. Since then, he had been living in the streets. Sometime later, one of the bullies persists to give Stanley a hard time for having Zero's help in the hole. Stanley confronts him, and Pendanski proposes a fight to solve their problem. As the boys brawl on the ground, Stanley gets easily overthrown, so Zero jumps in to help and almost kills the other guy. Pendanski shoots in the air to stop the fight, and soon the warden comes by to hear what happened. The boys explains that Zero is helping Stanley, so he quickly clarifies that he's teaching Zero how to read in return. However, the warden is angry, and Pendanski continuously makes jest of Zero as he calls him dumb. Zero can't take it anymore, and hits Pendanski with a shovel before running away into the desert. Mr. Sir wants to go after him, but the warden tells him not to. Zero have no family, so they could just delete his files and pretend he was never here. In the evening, the boys talk about how Zero would die in the desert. Stanley can't stop worrying and thinks about the story of Stanley the first surviving 16 days in the desert when Kate robbed him. Supposedly he finds refugee in some place called God's Thumb, but nobody know where. And Stanley the first couldn't tell because he was half mad when people found him. The next morning a new kid arrives to replace Zero, which bothers Stanley. He sets a plan, and when Mr. Sir comes to fill their bottles, Stanley hijacks the truck. Mr. Sir immediately goes after him and holds on to the door. So Stanley tries to push him away and gets him distracted, causing the truck to fall into a hole. Refusing to give up, Stanley leaves the vehicle and runs into the desert as the other boys cheers him on. When the warden hears about the incident, she instructs Mr. Sir to report Stanley is missing in 2 weeks because by then there won't be anything to find. Under the blistering sun, Stanley continues walking and ignoring all the deadly lizards in the area. Eventually he finds Sam's boat and Zero underneath it, tired and worn out. He's been surviving by eating the peaches Kate was giving Sam all those years, which became jam in jars. While Stanley is eating some, he notices a mountain in the distance that looks like a thumb, and realizes that's where his ancestor survived. The duo sets from the boat and starts climbing the mountain, which is quite strenuous. Stanley slips and almost falls, but Zero quickly reaches with his shovel to help him out. Unfortunately, this makes Zero's hands to hurt, so Stanley wraps up with a piece of clothing. The boys keeps climbing for a while, but soon Zero grows weak and falls. Stanley catches him before he rolls away. However, Zero's too exhausted and passes out. Not giving up, Stanley picks up his friend and carries him all the way up to the top of the mountain, just like his ancestor had taken the pig. Eventually Stanley arrives at some greens and notices a small stream with water and Sam's delicious onions. He immediately wakes Zero up and both starts eating and drinking to recover. Stanley also sings a song that his family likes, not knowing it's the pig's song passed through generations. Now Madame Zeroni's soul can rest in peace. The curse got lifted from the family, and Stanley III finds success in his invention and discovers an effective treatment for foot odor by blending peaches and onions, so the family rejoices. The next day, Zero makes a huge confession. He was the one who stole the shoes. He had seen the shoes as a donation for the shelter he was in and took them, not knowing they were famous. However, the police soon chase after him, so he took them off and threw them over the bridge, accidentally lands on Stanley. Zero eventually ends up getting caught for stealing the shoes from Palis the next day. Stanley isn't angry though. He in fact sees this as destiny, and he's glad it all happened. Meanwhile, Stanley's lawyers arrives at the camp to pick him up because it's been confirmed he's innocent. The warden kicks her out, but the lawyer vows to return with reinforcements. Back to Stanley and Zero. Since they're feeling better, they return to the digging area and find the hole where Stanley finds the lipstick. After lots of digging, they're excited to finally find the famous chest. At that moment the warden and Mr. Sir finds them. Surprisingly, Many deadly lizards come out and covers the boys and the chest to protect them. The warden plans to wait for the lizards to kill the boys and share a story of how her grandfather used to make her dig even on Christmas. Soon it's morning and the lizards still haven't moved, nor bite the boys. The wait is suddenly interrupted by the lawyer, who also came with a few cops. The warden fabricated a story about the boys stealing the chest from her office and running away with it, but Zero proves they're innocent by pointing at Stanley's name on it. Afterwards they returns back to the camp and the lawyer drops the chest in her car before announcing they're leaving. However, Stanley refuses to leave without Zero, so the lawyer requests for his files. When they finds out the file is missing, the cop makes a call to be granted permission for an investigation and discovers that Mr. Sir is a criminal on the run, and Pendanski isn't even a real doctor, so the two men and the warden are arrested. At the meantime it rains for the first time in years, and the boys all come out to celebrate. Few days later Stanley and Zero opens the chest with his family, and find lots of treasure, including shares for AT&T. Stanley requests to share the treasure with Zero, and his family agrees, so the first thing Zero does with his own share is to hire private investigators to find his mother, which turns out to be an emotional reunion. Sometime later, the camp is locked and the boys are sent to real guidance. Stanley's and Zero's families soon become neighbors in a beautiful neighborhood, and their friends from the camp come visiting often. Stanley's invention becomes a very big success, and the famous baseball star now works on his ads, showcasing it's all destined since the very beginning. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check on the videos displayed on the screen for more contents.